it has rituals that are very strange, and it also has some stories that are hard to comprehend. Last week in Parshat Shmini, there was a puzzle about the death of Nadav and Avihu. They died in the midst of a joyful dedication of the tabernacle in the desert. So the death of Nadav and Avihu was a mystery that ignited the imagination of many old sages as well as contemporary scholars. And that's last week. And we are always left with that question of what really happened in the dedication of the tabernacle. Next week, we will be reading about Yom Kippur rituals. In fact, next week, which is Achrei Mot, is the reading that we will read on Yom Kippur. There we have a ritual involving 2 goats. One goat is sent to the desert to a mysterious place called Azazel, and that goat is hurled down the mountains, and with its death it apparently takes away the sins of our people. A second goat is sacrificed on the altar in the temple, also to cleanse the sins of the people of Israel. So, and this is what we read today we read in synagogue during Parshat Achrei Mot, but also on Yom Kippur. And it's a very enigmatic, unusual ritual. This week we read about the mysterious disease called Tzara'at. Tzara'at. A person who is afflicted with it is called Metzorah. Okay, so Tzara'at is the disease, Metzorah is the name we give to a person who is afflicted. The Greek, actually the Septuagint, translated the word Tzara'at to leprosy. Leprosy is known in modern language, in modern medicine, it's called Hansen's disease. But when we read the Bible description of Tzara'at, it's pretty clear that it's not leprosy. And in fact, it's not even any known skin disease. So because the Septuagint mistranslated Tzara'at into leprosy, it made it also into the modern Hebrew language, where people who are sick with leprosy, in Hebrew they're called Tzara'at, Metzorah, even though, as I said before, it's really not the same disease. But it is a scale disease. There's a scaling on the skin. Dermatologists have been researching and giving lectures on this Torah portion. By the way, I remember dermatologists speaking at Beth El on this particular portion many years ago. Rabbi Waldman invited a dermatologist. But all the research they've done really show that Tzara'at is not corresponding to any known disease such as psoriasis. It's not the same as that. Moreover, the Torah called Tzara'at, the disease can affect the person's skin, it affects clothing and furniture. In fact, in today's reading, there was emphasis on clothing, right? All the different cloth that can have Tzara'at, by changing the color to Adam Demet, right? Red color and different coloration of clothing. So it's very different. Furniture can also get Tzara'at, vessels. And in the land of Israel, even a house can receive this affliction. Another thing we know about Tzara'at, it is not contagious. And many skin diseases are contagious, but Tzara'at is not. There are a few examples in the Tanakh of people who were sick with Tzara'at. A famous one is Job, right? Job was sick with it. But his friends came to visit him and they did not get infected, so it's not a contagious disease. Another example is from this Haftarah for Shabbat Azriya, talks about a commander of the Aram's army. His name is Naaman. Naaman was afflicted with Tzara'at, and he was living with his wife and with servants. As it says in the Torah, he was very physically close to his king, so he clearly was not contagious. And the way he became cured is by going to the Jordan and basically going like a mikveh in the Jordan River and dipping in it 7 times, and then his skin was healed. So it looks like it's not exactly a disease the way we understand diseases, if it can be healed by dipping in water. I would like to give some idea of how people are afraid of infectious diseases. Because in the ancient world as well as in modern time, there is a fear of a Metzorah, right? Somebody should be put out in quarantine, fear of contagion. So, for example, syphilis is a sexually transmitted disease, but because of the fear of being infected, it led to installation of automatic doors in public buildings. Every time you go through a turnstile in hotel or in airport and other public building, you may be reminded of the fear of venereal diseases. Public bathrooms contain special disposable paper to cover the toilet seat. These precautions are supposed to prevent sexually transmitted disease. Okay, this is ludicrous, obviously. And you would think, okay, so that was early in the 20th century. Today we know better. Well, we had the AIDS disease, 1980s. And the same kind of fear and phobia of syphilis surfaced again with the AIDS. I'm sure all of you remember when there was a lot of irrational fear, and there was a call to quarantine people with AIDS and or even people with HIV, right? They should be quarantined, even though, as we know, it's a sexually transmitted disease and they can live among us and they're not contagious. Turning our attention to the year 2020, the entire world went to quarantine. Okay, that's different. That's not sexually transmitted. This is a disease transmitted by the way flu is, by droplets and by the air, like sneezing, coughing, and so forth. But the fear of COVID-19 was so intense that people were afraid to go to hospitals in order to avoid being infectious. So people who could have been treated for pulmonary disease and other things, you go to the hospital, were afraid to go to the hospital, and they died at home from fear of being infected. So what I'm trying to say is the fear of disease is biblical in proportion, and we think that the ancients were afraid, had irrational fear, and I gave a few examples like syphilis and AIDS, that even in our own time, we are sometimes, as a society, become hysterical and afraid of contagion. So what is tzaraat? Let's go back to our Torah. What is tzaraat? The Torah understands it as some kind of impurity, a ritual impurity. It is a disease that affects the soul, but is manifesting itself in the body. So how does Torah understand this ritual impurity of tzaraat? The most impure state in the Torah is to be in the presence of death. A person who encountered the death of another person is impure. He's tameh. And then once you're tameh, once you're impure, you have to go from that state of impurity to another state called tahor, pure. So the Torah, especially in Leviticus, very important. You can be tameh, and then you have to go through a ritual to be tahor. You go from impurity to purity. For example, when Moses' sister was afflicted with tzaraat, Aaron prayed for her, and he said, Al na tehi kamet, asher betzeto merechem imo vayachel chatzi besaro. Let her not be like a corpse who emerges from a mother's womb with half her flesh eaten away. So while Miriam had tzaraat, her body was wasting away, she was like a corpse. Anyone who was around her was therefore become tameh, becoming impure. And now the scale disease of tzaraat is analogous to being in the presence of death. Again, this is the ancient way of looking at these diseases. The sages said that Metzorah, now again, the Metzorah is the person afflicted with tzaraat. It is short for Motzi Shem Ra, extracting evil speech. Motzi Shem Ra. Ra is bad, Shem is name. Okay, so Motzi Shem Ra, Metzorah, extracting evil speech. Words, speech, conversation are taken very seriously by Judaism and certainly by the Tanakh. We believe that God created the world by the words. Vayomer Elohim Yehi Or, Vayhi Or. God said, and there was. God said, and there was. That's how the world was created, with words of God. In Sinai, we hear words in Aseret HaDibrot, right? Aseret HaDibrot is not 10 commandments. Aseret HaDibrot is really the 10 utterances. God is speaking to us. When he speaks to Moses, Moses repeating the words to the people of Israel. So the world is created with God's speech, and the world remains living under the law of the Torah with Aseret HaDibrot and really all the other commandments. These are all utterances of God. And so the world is created by speech, and that's why it's so important for us to watch every word we say. And Metzorah, Motzi Shem Ra, is the modern implication is to watch our speech. So Ra. Also, we know another phrase called Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara, evil speech. And here we come to a modern time, right? Modern analysis. It is a social illness, and we see it manifestation in social media. There is so much hate online. The language of politics is the plague of our time, worse than the invisible virus. The Torah recognizes this as spiritual illness that has a physical manifestation. The Ra, the evil, is extracted from humans through speech. The body is covered with scales and the person needs to go into isolation. That's what the Torah is saying. But what we see today is Ra, Lashon Hara, which is a modern manifestation of this very same disease. Now, how was the Torah offering a cure? This was not, we didn't read it today, but it is in the portion of Tazria Metzorah. A person goes into 7-day in isolation, and then there is a purification ritual, and this is how it goes. A person is brought in front of the Kohen. Okay, this is not sorcery. There used to be ancient sorcery, but now the Kohen takes on that role. He looks at the skin and see if the skin has been healed. And now he makes a potion to transform the person from impure to pure, from tameh to tahor. He takes 2 birds. He slaughters 1 bird. The blood of that bird is mixed with cedar wood, crimson thread, and hyssop, and diluted in fresh water. He takes this liquid, again, blood, cedar wood, crimson thread, hyssop. Hyssop is a plant. He takes that with fresh water and sprinkle it on the recovered Metzorah, and with this ritual, the person transferred from being tameh to being tahor. I mentioned there were 2 birds. The second bird is sent free. I think the analogy is that 1 bird dies, takes away your sin, and another bird set free, and that's another way of freeing yourself from the sin. Jacob Milgrom, a prominent American Jewish Bible scholar and conservative rabbi, theorized that in ancient Israel, the neighboring cultures ascribed illness to demonic entity. The healer was an exorcist who removed the demon or the dibuk out of the sick person. In the purification ritual, the first bird symbolized death, while the second bird, which was set free, symbolized life. In the Israelite tradition, both illness and healing came from God, not from some sorcery. God is the healer, and the priest took on these magical powers and created a symbolic purification. So the ritual is really not a medical therapy, but a spiritual therapy. So it's purification with blood, hyssop, cedar, and crimson, right? Those were the ingredients. Have a pagan origin, and therefore we theorize that in order to remove the pagan ritual from the hands of the sorcerers, the Torah assigned it to the Kohen, so that they will stop to do sorcery in the land of Israel. These same ingredients, cedarwood, hyssop, crimson, were also used for preparation of another enigmatic purification rite, that of para aduma, the red heifer. So again, there were multiple rituals associated with these ingredients from the ancient world, from antiquity, from probably maybe even from the surrounding cultures, made itself into Judea, into the land of Israel, and transferred into ritual done by the Kohen. So the Azov is a very interesting part of it. Azov is a very lowly plant. In English, they call it hyssop. And that's the plant that's connected with this ritual. And the rabbi were asking why they're using this plant, this particular lowly plant. Rabbis understood it as a humbling experience. The afflicted person was haughty, arrogant, gossip monger, and so forth. And now he had to be humbled and brought down like the lowly hyssop, like the lowly Azov in Hebrew. So in summary, we understand in antiquity, there were diseases of tzaraat, people were deathly afraid of it, but I show that in our modern time, people were also very much hysterically afraid of AIDS and other diseases. And we know how we react to contagion and so forth, diseases of the soul afflicting the body, things that we still don't understand, that create great fear in us. We heard words from God, from the words of Torah. We try to make it relevant to our own time. We try to understand what the Torah means. And then we really make an analogy saying, Motzi Shem Ra, extracting even speech. Think about our own way. The Torah is a book of ethics and morality. And every word we say, the things we say, word can heal and words can hurt. And we know that. So it's all about the ethics, the morality, and the speech. And now, my friends, it's time to speak to God. God spoke to us through the Torah. We speak to God through our prayers with the Musaf service. Let us pray and continue with Musaf on page 155.
יישר כוח.
תודה רבה, עירית.